Number 38, this is FDI, Affiliate Sales and Investment Facilitation, Data Development and Estimation. I'd like to thank the organizers, Oriana Alexeuk, for organizing this session, and thanks for joining, everybody. So today's session chair won't be able to make it, so I will I'll be hosting and chairing the session. All the presenters have 20 minutes. I will do a 2 minutes reminder. I think by now everybody knows the rules. So just to remind you, please keep your microphones muted at all times. And if you have a question, you will ask so at the discussion. You can raise your hands. I'll be monitoring that. You can write in the chat box. I'll be monitoring that too. Or you can unmute and ask your question in person. So today we will first start with Roger So, and he's going to present a global foreign direct investment stocks database. He's from the World Trade Organization. And then our second presenter will be Steen Wettstein. He's also from World Trade Organization. He's going to be talking about foreign affiliate sales data. Our third presenter will be Zoriana Alexeuk. She's from German Development Institute. She's going to talk about the updated investment facilitation index. And finally, Eddie Beckers from World Trade Organization will be talking about estimating cost reductions of multinational activity of a potential investment facilitation agreement. So this will be a very interesting session. And without further ado, I'd like to leave the floor to Roger So. Take it away.
Yep, thank you. Sure. So thank you very much for the introduction and for hosting this session. I hope everyone can still see my slides and my mic is working, but feel free to interrupt me anytime if there's an issue. So just to begin, today I'm presenting a project that we've been working on for a while, which is to construct a global FDI stock database. And we're also constructing this as a supplementary database for GTAP version 10 and version 11. And as introduced, my name is Roger So. I'm a junior research economist at the WTO, and my co-authors are my colleagues, Dr. Eddie Beckers and Fabio Toraso, and also Dr. Gia Lacados from the World Bank, and Dr. Jin Yuan from the USITC. And beginning with a bit of introduction, our project is actually not new, but rather as an update to a previous FDI database constructed by a group of researchers from CEPI. They have constructed two databases, one for stock and one for flow, and they're three-dimensional, meaning that the database contains both bilateral and bisector information. And similarly, their database were designed for the CGE simulation, more specifically the GTAP FDI module, and they're fully consistent with GTAP version 7, which has 113 regions, 57 sectors, and the baseline year of 2004. Of course, today we have GTAP version 10 and very soon version 11 with a much more recent baseline year. And in the past, what many modelers had done is that they adopted a proportional growth to GDP as just kind of an ad hoc solution to update the database. But this is clearly not adequate. Aside from the obvious issue with this GDP growth assumption, there's a sort of increasing role played by developing countries as both the recipient and senders of FDI. So there's a rise of North-South and South-South FDI. In addition, the GTAP database between different versions are no longer compatible. Since version 10, there are now 141 regions, up from 113. And the GTAP sector had gone through a complete overhaul so as to be consistent with the new ISIC revision 4. Then there's the update on the FDI reporting standard, meaning that the quality of FDI data has also improved. And also more countries are now submitting more detailed FDI data. So there's greater data availability as well. And finally, our work synergizes as well with the other projects. For example, the expansion of GTAP FDI module, the update of foreign affiliate sales database, and the research on investment facilitation, which are discussed in our other presentations today. And since I've now mentioned the FATS database, I would just like to point out that our update this time concerns FDI stock only, and we're not updating the FDI flow. This is because most literature now uses FATS data because it is a much better proxy than FDI flow to measure the activities of foreign affiliates. So this is kind of the first deviation we took from the original approach. Now, this picture shows an overview of the database construction procedure. Step one is all about data collection, where we compiled all available FDI data into different dimensions or categories. The 1- and 2-dimensional database datasets will be used directly in the optimization. But in step 2, we are running a gravity estimation on the most detailed 3-dimensional dataset, and then we extrapolate for all missing values. After that, they are all put together in step 3 to go through a quadratic optimization. The step 1, 2, and 3 are the procedures taken in the original database construction. But in our project, we are introducing a further phantom FDI adjustment in step 4. The aim is to correct for the distortions caused by tax havens and offshore financial centers. And in the rest of this presentation, I'll just be going through the 4 steps one by one. And our goal is to produce an FDI stock database that are fully consistent with the GTAP version 10 and version 11 with the baseline year of 2014 and 2017. So beginning with the step 1, we're constructing 4 different data sets. And for those of you that are not familiar with the original work, the reason we have so many different data sets or so many different dimensions is that the raw FDI data is available in different form. And generally speaking, there's less data in higher dimension due to confidentiality reasons or the difficulties in data collection. And just as a quick introduction to what these data sets mean, at the 1-dimensional level, there's just typically 1 observation per country, indicating the total inward FDI received from the rest of the world, or the total outward FDI each country sent out. And then moving on to at the 2-dimensional bilateral level, countries report their FDI position with different partner countries, but note that there's no sectoral breakdown. And next, at the 2-dimensional sectoral level, this is actually very similar to the 1-dimensional data set, where country reports the total FDI with the rest of the world, but this time there is a sectoral breakdown. And then finally, the 3-dimensional data sets contain the most detailed FDI information that's both available by partners and by sector. And the complete data set at this level, the 3-dimensional level, is just precisely the goal of this whole project. And now moving on to a summary table, I just want to dive deeper and look at some of the more detailed characteristics of these data sets. Beginning with the data source, the raw FDI data is collected from the IMF, UNCTAD, OECD, Eurostat, and the International Trade Center. And you can see that apart from the 2-dimensional bilateral data set, we're actually merging information, merging FDI data from different sources. And I want to say that we put in a lot of attention to make sure that the data are compatible. And this is described in details in the paper. And next, when countries are reporting their FDI, they report both how much they receive, which is the inward FDI, and how much they sent out, which is the outward FDI. And in this project, we give preference to inward FDI due to greater availability, and we believe then we believe that similar in trade, countries may have greater incentives to sort of accurately measure the inward FDI, perhaps for taxation purposes. But however, for the 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional data sets, the outward values are still used. What we've done to them is that we've transformed them into mirror values. So as an example, country A's outward FDI to country B, you can think of it as country B inward FDI coming from country A. And of course, when you do this mirroring, when you do this kind of transformation, there'll be many conflicts where both mirrored and inward data is available. But whenever there's conflicts, again, we give preference to the inward data. As for the year coverage, at the 1 and 2 dimensional level, the data is only collected for 2014 and 2017, which correspond to the baseline year of GTAP version 10 and version 11. And at the 3 dimensional level, we actually collect them over 6-year periods from 2013 to 2018, because we need to construct a panel data for the upcoming gravity estimation. And then finally, at this bottom table, shows the country and sector coverage. And as expected, you sort of see less reporting country at higher dimension. And also in this project, we're only working with 34 sectors. You will note that there are 65 sectors in the GTAP classification. The 34 sectors actually cover them all. They're just a more aggregated version due to the availability of the Eurostat and the OECD database. So after introducing all the data sets in step 1, we're now setting aside the 1 and 2 dimensional data sets, as they won't return until step 3. Instead, we're now just focusing on the 3 dimensional data sets, which will run a gravity estimation and then extrapolate for all the missing values. So first, on the methodology, we use the PPML estimator to account for zero observation and heteroscedasticity, which accounts as the standard practice. We're also running the regression in each of the 34 sectors to acquire for sector-specific coefficients, and we include year fixed effect to account for the common shocks. But you will note that, when it comes to the fixed effect, the best practice in gravity estimation under a panel setting is actually to adopt the host year or importer year and the source year or exporter year fixed effect in order to control for this multilateral resistance terms. But unfortunately, their inclusion will absorb all the country-specific variables, such as GDP, which we absolutely need for our extrapolation. So this is a trade-off that we just have to make. And at the bottom of this slide, it shows the model specification, and the control variables are very standard. They include the log of GDP at the host and source country, log of GDP per capita at the host and source country, the log of distance, common language, colonial relationship, the developing country status at the host and source countries. And so far, all of these variables kind of in black are exactly the same as those adopted in the original 2004 paper. But we have decided to include 3 additional country dummies specific for Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Hong Kong. And the reason for their inclusion is that they are a very popular investment hub, and these 3 economies pose by far the biggest distortions in our database. And we can significantly improve our goodness of fit by separately accounting them using country dummies. And then aside from these 3 country dummies, if you compare with the original approach, the only other difference is that we're running sector by sector estimation, whereas in the original paper, the estimation is run under pooled estimation. So so overall, when we look at the methodology and model specification, there are many choices. And we've done a lot of work on comparing, say, the R-squared, the goodness of fit. We ran a bunch of robustness check, and we conducted a lot of outer sample validation to sort of pick the best model specification and to choose the most appropriate methodologies. That's a lot of content to cover, and due to time constraints, I don't have time to show all the stuff we did, but they're described in the paper. And now we're jumping straight into, after gravity estimation, we're jumping straight into the extrapolation, where we use the coefficient acquired to extrapolate for all missing values. And in the end, we're able to acquire a 204 by 203 by 34 sectors, each for 2017 and 2014. And in total, they amount to about 2.8 million observations, which is a huge data set, given that there are only just over 100,000 raw FDI data at the 3-dimensional level. This means that over 95% of the observations are extrapolated. And just as a summary of this extrapolated results, they're shown in this table. When we first look at the total world FDI in trillion US dollar, and from the last 2 columns, we see the increase in amount of total world FDI from just the raw data set to now the extrapolated data set. And we see the amount of increase here. And they're actually quite modest. The 4% of raw data, they already account for roughly a third of the total world FDI value. But nevertheless, this is still an overestimation, because if you compare to the one-dimensional and two-dimensional bilateral data set that have constructed in step 1, you see that they are slightly bigger. So there's a slight overshoot as well. So, and next, moving on from the comparison on world FDI, we zoom in just a little bit and look at the total inward FDI by country. Here you can see I have 2 tables that are showing the 10 smallest and 10 biggest FDI recipients ranked according to the extrapolated values, so the blue bar here. And they're comparing with the red bar and the green bar, which is the one-dimensional and two-dimensional data set that I have constructed in step 1. So on the left-hand side, you can see that for the 10 smallest FDI recipients, the three-dimensional extrapolate is significantly higher than what countries have reported under the two-dimensional and one-dimensional. This suggests a real overestimation for all of these very small countries. But you have a completely different picture at the right-hand side, where if you look at the 10 biggest recipients, the extrapolated result actually matches fairly well with what they have actually reported at the one-dimensional level, with just two exceptions for United Arab Emirates and Qatar, where the extrapolated values are much higher. And the reason they're much higher is because these 2 economies have a very high GDP and high GDP per capita, but they're actually not very well integrated in the world economy. It's the only reason that they have very high, the main reason they have very high GDP is because of their very rich in natural resources, and this it's not accounted for in our extrapolation. So you can see some of the limitations here, and of course the limitation with the small nations as well. And so the extrapolation is not perfect, and we hope that some of these can be accounted for in the quadratic optimization. So finally, now we're moving on to step 3, the quadratic optimization. So, and before running the actual optimization, just mentioning some of the other deviation we took in the project, which is to impose some pre-optimization constraint. And more specifically, we're fixing the FDI values at the bilateral level using the two-dimensional data sets constructed in step 1. So whenever there's an observation at the bilateral level, we impose that as a hard constraint, and we only use the three-dimensional sort of extrapolated values to infer the sectoral shares. And then the extrapolated values are only adopted for the missing values. And the reason we are imposing this constraint using the two-dimensional bilateral data sets is because we think this is the most comprehensive and the most reliable data set. So we really give a high weight for that data set. And that by imposing this constraint, we also drastically reduce our computational time. And then secondly, the other step we take is that in the extrapolated data set, we have over 200 countries. We are aggregating them according to the GTAP country regions, which is 141 regions with 120 economies and 21 residual regions. And the reason we do that is because, again, by reducing the number of regions, we reduce the computational time for the optimization, because it is really time consuming. And this is the equation that we use. This is, as you can, so the minimized equation is this. We minimize the projected differences at the three-dimensional level, two-dimensional sectoral level, and one-dimensional level. And this, comparing to the 2004 paper, the original data construction exercise, this is very much more simplified with just 3 components. In the original approach, I think there are 6 components, because they also include the bilateral level, which we have fixed, and also include the outward level as well. And then at the bottom, these are just a very standard set of constraints. This is just to make sure that the data at the three-dimensional level adds up to the two-dimensional level, and then in turns add up to the one-dimensional level. So this is pretty standard. And now I'd just like to show you, I was thinking about how can I show the results of the optimization. And I think a good way to show it is to compare with the original results. and you can see them from 2004 and 2017. And the percentage here shows the percentage of inward FDI by host and outward FDI comparing to the in terms of the total world FDI. And you can see that some of the biggest difference occurred at these very wealthy, very developed industrial countries. For example, US and Britain. You can see the very large decrease in the share for these countries. And on the other hand, for emerging markets such as China and India, their shares have also drastically increased over the 10 years period. And this is especially true if you look at the final row, the rest of the world, where you have an increase from 16.3 to 26.9 when it comes to total inward, and then 13.4 to 24.6 when it comes to the outward FDI. And this just shows what I've described in the introduction, where there's a rise in both north-south FDI and the south-south FDI. And it's pretty amazing that it happens over just over 10 years period, especially considering where our project is focusing on stock, which you can think of as a cumulative values of all past FDI flow. So they shouldn't really change too much, but still we observe a large differences. And then moving on from country comparison, we can also compare it at the sectoral level. Where what I've shown in this table, the agriculture, the primary sector, secondary sector, and tertiary sectors.
2 minutes. Sorry, 2 minutes remaining.
2 minutes. Okay, I'll be quick. And it just shows that. It just shows the changes here, and it's probably difficult to infer much from the table, but an estimate from UNCTAD shows that services usually account for over 2/3 of the global FDI stocks. So the estimation here might still be a slight overestimation at the services sectors. We are aware of this issue, and our quadratic optimization is not final, but subject to changes. So normally this is where my presentation will end, but I only have 2 minutes. So I will quickly introduce the very last steps we've taken, which is the phantom FDI adjustments. Just to introduce some of the issues. So suppose you have a country, inward FDI of country A that are coming from a traditional tax haven, such as Bermuda or Panama. You can think that investment from these sort of regions, they're not really from these tax havens, but rather from some other countries. And then this is also the same for investment hubs, such as the Luxembourg, Netherlands, or Hong Kong that I've described earlier. For these categories, these are still, although they have a lot of phantom FDI, these are still major economies that you would think that some of the FDI are legitimate, but definitely not all of them. So this just shows that in our FDI statistic, they're heavily distorted by the presence of tax haven and offshore financial centers. And the methodology that we have adopted to adjust this is we have done an exact replication from a paper from Bruno Casella, who is an economist from UNCTAD, and he had proposed a solution to first estimate 100 FDI, and then redistribute them to their likely ultimate investor under probabilistic approach. More specifically, the absorbing Markov chain. And the key parameter they use here is the country probability, which is imposed exogenously. So for a list of 38 tax havens defined by the OECD, the probability is it's imposed as 1, and for some investment hub, they are self-reported, which means so some countries in the OECD database, they report the proportion of FDI made by special purpose entities, which you can think of as the shell companies are making these phantom FDI, and we can take that share of FDI as the country probability value. And for all the residual regions, we assign them a probability of 0. Because of the time constraint, I guess I can jump straight into the results, which probably is the most interesting part. So we now have, so in this 4 table, we have the inward FDI of Germany, France, US, and mainland China. And the blue bar, first the red bar shows the original result after the optimization, and the blue bar shows the adjusted result after this phantom FDI adjustments. And you can see very clearly there's a huge decrease in FDI coming from Luxembourg or Netherlands, and they're assigned to all these other regions. And most importantly, a lot of them are assigned back to the USA. And it's also interesting if you look at China, especially the role played by Hong Kong and the XCB, which refers to a group of Caribbean countries, as according to the GTAP region's definition. And you can see how much they have reduced from the red bar to the green to the blue bar, and how they're assigned to all these other regions. So this is, I think this is very interesting. But of course, this method has a lot of limitation. Again, I don't have time to go through all the limitation, but I'm happy to discuss them in our discussion session. But just to quickly conclude, so finally, in our final output, we have constructed 4 different data sets. And this is because of the current limitation with this phantom FDI methodology. We're not 100% confident of this method. So what we've done is we created 2 data sets, two for 2014 and 2 for 2017, with and without the phantom FDI adjustments. And the final data set contains 141 regions and 34 sectors. And note that in the GTAP definition, in the GTAP database, there are 65 sectors. So we need further sector disaggregation is required if modulus require more sectors. And we didn't do it here, but the reconciliation, how to disaggregate the sectors, they can be found in the other papers. And very quickly, just the final thing is just a very quick summary of all the differences we took comparing to the original approach. So this is just a quick summary of what I've talked about. So in the data collection sections, we give heavy preference to inward FDI. And during the gravity estimation, comparing to the original approach, we adopted a sector by sector estimation, and we have 3 country dummies. And during the quadratic optimization, we have some pre-optimization constraints, which is fixing the FDI values at the bilateral level. And finally, we impose this experimental steps, which is the phantom FDI adjustments. But we also give the options for any interested modelers to use the data set without the phantom FDI adjustment if they're not confident of the methodology. So yeah, this is it from me. Yeah, thank you very much. I guess I can move on to the discussion session.
Thank you, Roger, for this excellent presentation. It's a very commendable study with a lot of data detail and dimensionality, so I congratulate you for that. And I will leave the floor for discussion. We already have a comment in the chat box. So Maria Latour is saying, Okay. We go back. She's saying, thank you very much for an excellent, very clear presentation. Are these data going to be publicly available? If so, when? And further, I think the GTAP FDI model is not publicly available. Is that correct? And thank you. Maria, if you would like to unmute and add additional comments or ask your question in person, that'd be okay too.
Yep. So I think the first question is, are these data going to be publicly available? Yeah, they're all going to, our plan is they're all going to be available, just like the original database, and they're all going to be public, free of use. And when will they be available? At this stage, the phantom FDI is just an optional option, and we are following the exact replication from the Bruno Casellas method. We are thinking about making some modification, but we're not certain at this moment. And that we're also tinkering some of the quadratic optimization. So when it comes to a timeline, I can't be sure, but I think potentially it can be, we can publish maybe the data set in the next few months. And the paper will need to be polished as well. So hopefully the aim is to have everything done certainly by the end of this year. But I will need to have, obviously we have many co-authors on this project, so I need to check with them as well. And I think I was looking at the chat box right now. Is the FDI, GTAP FDI model not public? Okay. So the GTAP FDI model, that's a different project. I think that's a project that was, so my co-author, Dr. Eddie Beckers, he's working on that project. And I think that project was presented yesterday in the conference. I don't know the timeline of that, but Eddie will be presenting later as the last presenter. So maybe he can answer that question. But I don't know when would the GTAP FDI model be available. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Roger. I think it was a great summary of a lot of work in a few minutes. Congratulations. I think you made it really clear. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. We have another question from Honor Buyug. I'll read it out loud, and then if you would like to unmute and ask it in person, you're welcome to do so, Honor. So he's saying, excellent presentation. I just wonder 2 questions to grasp your study. Why you didn't compare FDI and log FDI plus 1? To fix distribution, the second one is the cluster effect, slide 20, like multi-level analysis, why you did not consider if you implement log FDI plus 2, because you control sectors.
I see. Well, we didn't. So when it comes to the comparing the FDI and the log of FDI plus 1, I think we didn't have too much discussion on this. I think the view, I guess, is because there are some issues with this log FDI plus 1, and that's supposedly, this plus 1, it could mean plus 1 million. And for many country pairs, the data is actually less than 1 million. So when you have FDI plus 1, it could be have a very drastic difference. Of course, you can also say FDI plus 0.1 or 0.001. But I guess the other reason is because we want to have a sense of continuity from the original approach, that we don't want to make too many changes. We already made a lot of changes with the 2004 paper. So we didn't, you're right, I actually didn't check that. I didn't compare the PPML estimator with this log FDI plus 1. Maybe I can go back and check it. Hopefully, the result won't be lots of differences, because at this stage, changing the methodology at the gravity estimation will be very difficult, because as you can see, it's from step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. And if you change something in step 3, then it will become very difficult later on, because then the whole project is subject to changes. So I think at this stage, the gravity estimation will we will adopt the approach that we have taken. But I think I will do more robustness checks and probably flesh out the robustness check sections in the paper. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And Adi has a comment about Maria's question. He's saying, I think Erwin will present on the modeling part, so maybe checking with Erwin would give us some more information about when the model will be available. I have a quick question, since we have a little bit of time left for the discussion. So this has a lot of dimensionality, as you also mentioned, and you also mentioned that you reduced the GTAP regions because of the computational challenges. I'm wondering how long it takes for your in terms of the computational part, how long it takes. And another question I have is that when you compare the results by host, by source, by development, I see that Europe seems very similar even among the developed regions. So is there anything about the European data set? Do you have more data available for Europe? Is that why it's so similar compared to the others? Thank you.
Yeah, so the computation time, I actually didn't, I wasn't the co-author that focused on the quadratic optimization, but I remember Dr. Sheila Lakata, she was mentioning that even after all the steps were taken as imposing the constraints at the two-dimensional level and reducing this, aggregating this country dimension, the running time is still between 3 to 4 hours. And if we do not impose these constraints and aggregation, I think she mentioned it once, is that she never gets to finish them, and there's constantly error messages. So that's why we aggregate them up to 141 regions. And I think you also asked, I think you asked why the EU didn't change, or the other country, they didn't seem to change so much. I think as I've mentioned, this is a stock, an update on stock. So even though if you see the changes, for instance, let's take China, for example, from 3.7 to 6.1, this is still quite significant because we're talking about the stock, which is the cumulative investment. You can think of dating back from the last 40, 50 years. So even though the absolute percentage change is within single digit, especially if you look at India, 0.4 to 1.3, which is less than 1% percentage point change, but still they represent a huge changes in that because we're looking at FDI stock. I'm pretty sure that if I were to do also an update for the FDI flow, you will see the percentage change will be much bigger. So I would think that. And in terms of the changes for the EU27, you're right. If you look at this, the changes is very little. It's quite small. But I don't know. Maybe it's because EU27 just contains many different countries with different level of development. So I actually didn't check them, all the 27 from one by one. So maybe you would have the case where, say, France or Germany, their share will decrease, whereas a lot of say newly admitted EU members over the past 10, 20 years, their share will increase. But I will need to double check on that. And this, yeah.
Thank you so much, Roger, for the explanation and the wonderful presentation. So I think it's time to move on to our second presenter, Steen Wetstein. Roger, if you could stop sharing. Yeah. Yes, Steen, why don't you go ahead and share your slides with me. So Steen is from WTO, and he's going to present foreign affiliate sales data. The floor is yours, Steen.
Thank you. Can you please confirm you can hear me and see me, or see my presentation? Yes? Okay, fine. Well, first of all, thank you, Roger, for this very good presentation. I am going to present to you the methodology on the foreign affiliates sales data. So it's very similar than what Roger has presented. So I might breeze through a couple of parts of my presentation, since we might see some overlaps. Our methodology, our work is based upon the work that's been done, that is already existing. So including the work of Lakatos into 2012, as well as the more recent work on the TISMOS work, so the trade and services by modes of supply, that's been conducted at the WTO. That was back in 2017. So we have been working in parallel with Roger and our co-authors, the contributors, And you will see that the methodology is actually similar. We do have some similar objectives, though we have some differences. So I might try to highlight those differences, but you see that we will see some similarities between the two projects. So I will give you a little bit of background on the foreign affiliates domains, explaining a little bit the data collection and where we found information, because it actually remains quite of a challenge to find data on the foreign affiliates. I will talk a little bit about the data imputation and how we, similarly to what was presented before, how we impute estimates to this data set before reconciling, ensuring the consistency of the data sets using a similar approach of quadratic optimization. So regarding the FEAS domain, what we refer to when we talk about foreign affiliate statistics is the enterprises that are resident in compiling a country, and over which there is an institutional unit. And there's a notion of control. And actually what we mean by control is the power to name the majority of the directors in a company, which is direct or indirect. And also the notion of having control or the voting power at each stage of the ownership of that enterprise. This defines the control. Also, something to keep in mind is that those affiliates, those enterprises, are classified according to their primary activity, which is something to keep in mind. There's also in the definition, for example, in the Eurostat database, it's mentioned that we have actually enterprises only for that contain more than 20 people that are employed, that have total assets of more than 1 million euros, or that, for example, have foreign direct investment at least of 400,000 euros. So those are some of the characteristics of the data we're working with. Regarding the objective, it's very similar to what was presented before, and basically what we want is to produce a complete, reconciled, full global data set of foreign affiliate sales. The idea is also a data set that will be able to be merged in the GTAP database, and therefore used as an input in the CG models. The final product will be a complete database, a complete data set of FAT sales that will encompass 202 economies. But like before, this will be converted into the GTAP country groups, which is around 140 groups. Similarly, we work with 35 industries from A to S in the ISE classification that are converted as well into those GTAP sectors. And I think we have more than 60 sectors. And we do this using proportionality shares to do the conversion. Regarding the time span, we have in the time dimension, we work with the use from 2008 to 2018, even though we are interested for the GTAP purpose, only the 2014 and 2017 that will be integrated respectively in GTAP 10 and GTAP 11. So regarding the data collection, just a few insights. We have more than 50 countries for which we have hard data information. It's actually hard to find data, and our main data is mainly sourced from the Eurostat. We also have those dimensions that were previously presented. So the 3-dimensional data, 2-dimensional, sectoral 2-dimensional, and 1-dimensional. I think we don't have 1 dimension, we have only 2 and 3-dimensional data. They are mainly sourced from Eurostat for the main 28 EU countries, plus 2 countries. I think those are Bosnia and Norway, if I'm not mistaken, completed with a few OECD countries and some national sources. So some countries publish data on their website, national websites from the statistical entities. And for those who are both present in the OECD database, but also present data on their national websites, for example, we compare them, and then for some of them, we have, whenever we don't have overlap with the years, we use both sources. Otherwise, we chose we had a preference for national sources. So as you can see here, this table, those are just the number of data points we have per country. And you see that we actually cover the main traders, and what we have in the national sources are usually 2-dimensional data. So we have aggregated figures, and this will serve as boundaries whenever we need to reconcile all the dimensions together. We also give a preference to the inward FATs, as we believe this is a better quality in general. So I will talk a little bit more about this in the next slides. There were a few adjustments that needed to be made before working with the data. So one main difference was between the sales and output. And what we mean by sales is the gross operating revenues. And usually they refer to the total invoiced for the sales of goods or services that are rendered, but they also include duties and taxes. And this is not always something that we are interested in. And rather, when you look at outputs, you will see that the goods and services are produced within the specific establishment. But this will only include the value of those services without the goods, for example, in some industries. So actually, outputs and sales will be most of the time identical or very similar, with some exceptions. For example, in the industry of wholesale and retail, which is actually quite inflated when we look at sales. And for us, this does not really represent the real economic activity, since we are including the value of goods that are sold in those transactions. So, and same for the financial intermediation and insurance. So as it is mentioned, for example, in the international guideline, including the manual on statistics in international trade services, it is mentioned that actually output can be a superior measure for at least some of those industries, and including those that I've just mentioned. So what we do here in our analysis is that we take the outputs variable for the wholesale retail, so the industry G, and we do have a specific treatment for the financial industry, the aggregated industry K in Eurostat. And the reason is because it's not available in inward directly. So what we do instead is that we calculate it using the subcomponents of K, namely K64, 65, 66, because they are available. So we just compute it, and what we have available is the sales for K64, the outputs for K65 and K66. So we reconstruct this financial and insurance activities as being the sum of those, so a mix of sales and outputs. And then what we do, or maybe the specificity of this data set, is that it contains a large number of zeros, and especially when we look at it at the three-dimensional FATS data. So as you can imagine, when you look country to country, there's lots of zeros that will appear in the data set. So what we can do to derive data as much as possible is to first use the structure of the data sets, and it allows us to identify and fill a lot of missing zeros. For instance, whenever we have reported data at the aggregated level, what we can do is we, for example, with partner world, so the two-dimensional level is reported with zeros. What we can do is we can actually create new entries country to country and fill them with zeros. Same with aggregated industries. Whenever there are zeros, we can just fill some sub-industries with zeros. We also use some FDI stats, actually, the ones that were provided by Roger. We also assume that if there's no foreign direct investments, the assumption is that there's no commercial presence or foreign entities. And therefore, in these cases, we also fill data entries with zeros. We do the same for the number of enterprises in the FEAS domain. So whenever they report no enterprises, we assume that there's no sales. We also use the time dimension. So whenever we have multiple data points that are reported within a time series, what we do is we prefer using averages instead of mixing, for example, predicting values with hard data. In that case, we use back and forecasting methods whenever data are missing at the beginning or the end of the time series, respectively. And then, as I mentioned before, we're very much interested in inward statistics. And the reason why is because we believe inward statistics are better quality in general. However, whenever we don't have any observation in inward, what we can do is use the mirroring flow and what was reported on the outward side by the trading partner. And this constitutes a very nice way of estimating those missing flows. However, we know there are some quite large discrepancies between inward and outward flow. So we spent actually some time investigating on how to correct this because we're mixing estimates, predicted values with hard data, with mirroring. So this is something that will need to be dealt in the end in the optimization procedure, that how, like it was explained before, so by Roger. But here, in terms of discrepancies between the two flows, so whenever we have both inward and outward values, we see that sometimes we can have some quite large discrepancies. So the idea was to find a solution to correct for this. But what is usually done in the trade literature is that, for example, the Galler's paper tries to reconcile import and export data, and they develop a methodology on how accurate the reporting is. And we use a similar approach using a more updated version of this, but instead of using or correcting inward or outward, and because it's actually not so much available, what we do instead is we take inward as a benchmark, and whenever we have both information, we will try to construct a similarity measure using Shar's method. And what we do here is that we have an index that will give us this, how accurate a reporter is based on what other countries report. And if this index is below a certain threshold that we fixed at 0.2, again, it's something we've investigated and we tried many different things to see the differences. In the end, we use outward instead of inward, just as simply as it is. So that's just for the discrepancies and how to choose between inward and outward. At the end of this step, every single data point is identified with a specific flag that will enable the user or just for us to trace or to understand what is the adjustment and what is the method behind specific data entry. So what we can see here is that, so we have all those mirroring techniques. We have a lot of data that are mirrored, including some estimates. We have some FDI derivation and world derivation, as I mentioned earlier. And that's, at this point, constitute the data sets that will be used for the gravity estimation. So in that step, that's similar to what was presented by Roger. We use the 3D, three-dimensional data, so country-to-country data. And here, maybe something that Roger did not present was all the investigation that we did on how to select the specification and how to compare the impacts of using, for example, GDP versus sectoral value added, pooled regression versus sectoral regression. Again, we also use the PPML estimator. And here, what I would like to show you is just how we did to compare, for example, those three different specifications. We have the first one, which is the traditional sort of set of regressors that they use in the literature, using the distance, the colonial relationship, contiguity, the common language. And then what we use is the sectoral value added that is sourced from the national accounts, from the UN websites. And then we use GDP per capita of both the host and the home countries. And then in the second specification, what we do is we include some additional variables, and including
sorry, 2 minutes reminder. 2 minutes reminder.
Okay, so I need to speed up a little bit. So we test here the development status, the free trade agreement. We have the bilateral investment treaty, the worldwide government index, and whether or not the trade is intra-EU trade. The third specification is the same as the first one, using GDP instead of value added, sectoral value added. So I'm not going to go into the details, but basically we ran regressions, pooled regressions, and then we compared removing those derivations, removing those mirroring values, only using reported values, trying to see the impact on the coefficients and the statistics. Here we run some regressions with industry year fixed effects. What you can see is the impact on those coefficients, the significance of the coefficients, and the R squared, basically. That doesn't tell us whether those estimates are actually better in terms of predictions. It gives us a goodness of fit, maybe, but we still need some more information. We did the same sector by sector regressions. Here is just a quick summary of those results. I'm not going to go into the details, but what I can show you is that we also ran, and Roger did the same actually, some cross-validation exercise where we simulated a number of times. The principle is that we had both a training set and a test set. And in the training sets, we use 70% of those observations available. And then we ran the regression. Then what you do is you estimate your coefficients, and you use those coefficients to predict the remaining part, the test sets, the 30% remaining. And then you compute the differences, the error that you make. And each little bar represents this mean absolute error that you make in each of this repetition of this algorithm. We did it above for the pooled regressions and for the sectoral regressions, for the different specifications that I shown previously. And what the results indicate is that there is a preference on average for the second specification, which means that on average, you can clearly show by those distributions that the green distribution is on the left, meaning that the average error is usually smaller for the second specification. That's what we are interested in. So that was for all the sectors combined. If we look at sector cases, it was also show a very similar picture. So in the end, what we did is we decided to go for the second specification. So this table shows a summary before reconciling all the dimensions together. And we see that from the last two rows of this table is that in terms of the number of data points we have estimated here at the three-dimensional level, okay, again, because this only shows three-dimensional estimates. 92% of the data cells are actually estimated against 8%. But in value terms, this changes, and we actually have 32% of the values that are reported by countries, against 68% that is estimated. In the end, it's still work in progress. So as I mentioned before, we have a very similar methodology, but we're not as advanced as Roger's team on this, and we are still working on this quadratic optimization, but the principle remains the same. And yep, so just a few words to conclude, but we've seen that it's actually quite a challenge to build a full and consistent foreign affiliate sales data set. The reason is because of the number of zeros, but most importantly, because data is usually not available. So we did our best to investigate as much as possible the modeling side and improve the methodology that's been developed so far. And the complete data set will be available very soon. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Steen, for the presentation. A complete and reconciled GTAP data set, reconciled foreign affiliate sales data set at the GTAP level is also very, very useful. And I want to open the floor for questions. Does anybody have any questions? If not, I want to ask, I want to get it started. And I was wondering about merging it with the GTAP dataset. So when this dataset, when it is going to be available, is it going to be at the GTAP sectoral definition or more desegregated?
I think both, but it will. We will need to see. There's still some work that needs to be done. I think the priority with this version of the dataset will be the GTAP version, but I think Eddie Beckers might be able to give you a better answer. But we're also working in parallel with the services team at the WTO, and we're working on updating this trading services by modes of supply data. And we're using also this FATS data, but we have a bigger time range. And this will also be disseminated on our website, but we'll need to see probably by the end of the summer or by the end of this year, it should be available.
Thank you. Let me see. Okay, Maria has a comment. Should I read it out loud, or do you want to unmute and comment?
No, yes, it's fine. So the person is asking whether there are some significant changes with respect to the methodology that was undertaken by Lakatos and Fukui for the sales database. So I think the objective, yes, is to map to the GTAP 10 and GTAP 11. There are some minor differences. For instance, we use a lot of those derivations that I presented, but there's still some overlap in terms of methodology. For example, they also investigated a lot of them on the modeling side, something we also benefited from. But I would say that we have some sort of similar methodology with some improvements. But we could say that is pretty close in terms of methodology.
Thank you for your question, Maria. Eddie has a clarification. He's saying the objective is to map it to GTAP 10 and GTAP 11. So any other questions or comments? Okay. I have a question about outward FDI. So basically, the information about outward FDI is really difficult to get. Are you planning on expanding on that front in this project, or you're going to be wrapping this up and then move on to something else?
I think you would like to mention FATS outward, I guess, but yes, that will need to be seen with the quadratic optimization, whether we can actually use inward as being the outward, because in the end, if you construct only one data set, you're just taking the reverse and you assume that it can be used as being outward, just seen from the opposite direction. So we are working on it, and we'll see whether we can use those outward two-dimensional figures to give some boundaries and how much we can deal with those inconsistencies that we can introduce in the data set. So I think, yes, it should be available for both those in the end.
Thank you, Steen. So one final question, because we don't have much time left. Maria is asking, have you looked at how similar the FDI and sales databases look like? And Zoriana, you can share your PowerPoint while Steen responds to the question. Thanks.
We haven't investigated so much yet, and the reason is because the project is not over, but I think that might be very interesting to see how similar the data are between the two projects. So it will definitely be done. So thank you for your question.
Thank you, Steen, for this wonderful and thorough presentation. So our next presenter is Zoriana Oleksiuk from German Development Institute, and she's going to present the updated investment facilitation index. Over to you, Zoriana.
Thank you very much, Dinah, and thank you very much for both presenters. I'm really excited about new databases. We will be able to do much better job in the future modeling FDI, and that's really great. We're actually working also on FDI more or less, but with a special topic on investment facilitation. I will present as the joint work with Mark Bacchetta, Axel Berger, Ale Datkan by myself. And to be honest, we have started the project 2017, 2018. Just to give you a quick overview why we did start to work on it, investment facilitation was quite a big topic in 2017, because at the WTO Ministerial Conference, there was issued by 69 countries a first joint ministerial statement on investment facilitation for development. And although there were discussions on investment facilitation just after the assignment of trade facilitation agreement, still there was the first significant step in this direction. And directly after that conference, the structured discussion started in March 2018. And after 2 years, which is very, very quickly, formal discussions at the WTO started on investment facilitation agreement, and those are really big plurilateral negotiations where now over 100 countries are participating. And a very, very interesting key feature is that this process is driven by a group of developing countries. First of all, Friends of Investment Facilitation for Development, including Argentina, Brazil, China, Kazakhstan, Russia, and the MICTA countries with Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, and Australia. And there we see kind of reversal from developing countries that were driving the negotiations on investment liberalization, dispute settlement, and so on in the 90s, 2000, right? To developing countries, which are now keen on investments facilitation commitments that would enable them to promote more stronger FDI. So there is a stronger interest from developing countries, definitely. And the substantial, the aim of the negotiation is to reach the substantial outcome by the end of this year, because then the 12th ministerial conference is planned right now, and we aim for producing the full data set also up to that moment. So we have the FDI stock database, the sales, affiliate sales data, and then you have also the investment facilitation index data set available. And that's very important because there is a big need in empirical research to inform policymakers to take different decisions, and there is quite little research done in this area. Okay, about our index. As I said, we started to work on it in 2017-18, and for the first version of the index, we had 6 different proposals by Russia, Argentina, Brazil, the MICTA countries, China, Friends of Investment Facilitation for Development, and we used information, first of all, to conceptualize actually investment facilitation. You cannot believe, but still there are quite different definitions of investment facilitation, and it was starting kind of from scratch to draw a big picture, what falls under the scope, and that was the first big step. Now there are around 25 proposals, and we have a quite big progress in the negotiations. They meet monthly, and every time we hear in different events, in the reports of participating parts that there are new decisions have been taken. So we have tried to take all of the new developments in this process into account and to update our broad concept investment facilitation. So that's why we're now producing the second version, the updated investment facilitation index. And hereby we use kind of 2 approaches, the negative and positive approach. The negative one, that is very clear that all countries have agreed that investment facilitation will not cover market access, investment protection, government procurement, and investor-state dispute settlement. And regarding the positive one, it's very clear that transparency and predictability, mechanism for different dialogue and cooperation, national focal point, single window, and newly corporate social responsibility will be part of it. Regarding the corporate social responsibility, it's very new. We were discussing that back 2 years ago, and everybody were like, well, probably it will not be part of the final agreement, but now it's on the table. So that was the reason we had to include it in our index right now. And that is the table with a broad description of the 6 policy areas. So we have an index now with over 100 measures that fall under investment facilitation, and we grouped it in different 6 policy areas. The first one is regarding transparency and predictability, includes different measures that describe the clear and up-to-date picture of the investment regime of every country and promotes legislative simplification, including plain language drafting. The electronic governance policy area is definitely about the communications technology. That's the creation of single window that's very similar to trade facilitation. Cooperation, it refers to cooperation and coordination not only on regional and international level, but also on domestic level, meaning coordination between different agencies involved in the process. Then we have measures regarding application process, going through different criteria to transparent procedures and streamlining procedures to reduce the complexity of fees and charges and so on and so forth. The new policy area, responsible business conduct and anti-corruption, I will come back to that later on. And we have also focal point and review, which is very, very important, actually also policy area that provide mechanisms to improve relations or facilitate contacts between host governments and the stakeholders, also to receive complaints for investment and help them to solve difficulties and to avoid actually any dispute settlement mechanism that can be applied. And that is actually focal point and single window is quite often used in the more or less same manner. So here I would like to show you the responsible business conduct and anti-corruption policy area that we have now incorporated in the index. We have here 5 completely new measures. And for example, the first one includes the International Labour Organization Declaration of Principles concerning multilateral enterprises and social policy. The second one is the UN Taxation Convention between developed and developing countries, then the UN Convention against corruption and combating bribery of foreign public officials in international business transactions. And you can see that we have here as an example the responses. So if the countries do not encourage enterprises to include those rules and those conventions for their firms or investors, then the answer is 0. And 2, if they do encourage enterprises to use those. Going further, we have the rather big change is that we have removed the outward investment policy area. Well, that was quite a hard decision. There are different views. Unfortunately, outward investment is now not on the table during the negotiation, as far as we know. Although there was a proposal from China to include those measures, and we had this policy area with 8 different commitments in the previous version of the index. But as far as it's not on the table, we decided still to include the most important measures regarding outward investment, though the 2 displayed here under different policy areas, and that's insurance and guarantees. So the home country provides investment insurance and guarantees to the investor, and cooperation and exchange of information with respect to investment opportunities and on domestic investors. So that's the way we try to kind of keep it, because still outward investment should be part of the whole investment facilitation project, but obviously it will not be in the agreement. As far as it is not, that should be, I guess, enough to give some more information across the different countries. What we have also done, we have merged some very detailed measures in the sense that they were not in that detail discussed by the negotiating countries, and we've got the feedback that it might be too detailed, so we merged them with much broader responses. And we dropped some measures that are not under discussions at all and will not probably be included at all. Instead, we included 16 new measures that actually popped up quite surprisingly. We thought we have almost everything covered, but still, after communicating, we found still new measures that we had to include in our data set. So we moved now from 117 measures to 100, I guess 1 or 2, a bit less due to this merging and dropping some measures, but it's fairly updated, and it covers not only what is on the table right now and not only the binding and best endeavor measures, but it goes far beyond and tries to describe the whole picture of investment facilitation commitments. Now about methodology very quickly. The scoring scheme is quite is similar to the old one. So we use the multiple binary scheme, and you see here the example of publication of investment guidebook. So it's score of 0 if investment authorities do not publish an investment guidebook. It's 1 if they do publish it, and 2 if they publish it on a single window website. So it's much easier available and accessible for investors all over the world, and you don't have to even look for it because it's all on the single window website. That's why 2 corresponds always to the best performance. And this 1, 2, 3 or 0, 1, 2 is reflects the state or the stage of implementation of different measures. We have also some variables that depend on numerical answers. As an example here with World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report, we used the judicial independence to report it for all of the countries. And there we have some thresholds to assign the answer 0, 1, and 2. As here you see the answer is 0 if it's below 3.3, that is the 30th percentile of the country sample, 1 if it's between 3.3 and 4.7, and 2 if it's above 4.7, which is the 70th percentile. So that's the way we try to code this single measures. And now we're coming to the weighting. Well, that's quite interesting. We in the first version of our index, we relied on the expert survey, and since we have now excluded outward investment and included the corporate social responsibility policy area, we do need to repeat this exercise with the expert survey. I think that it's much better because it reflects not only the number of measures within each policy area if we do it with the equal weights, right? It also reflects the opinion of people that work with investment facilitation, and we try to cover people from the academia, NGOs, governments, and from private sector definitely also. And we asked them to allocate a total of 100 points across the 6 policy areas in a manner that reflects each area's relative importance in investment facilitation, in particular with regard to attracting and retaining FDI flows. Unfortunately, I was going to present you the first results of the survey, but even though we sent it out in the beginning of May, we've got only 19 responses, and we sent it out to over 200 people. So I think the response rate is way lower than the first time, probably because of our virtual working space for over a year, and people just do not respond or react to the email they receive as a year ago. That's a problem. That's why we will be really very happy and appreciate if you would take part in that survey and maybe forward the link which is included here, and I will also upload the latest presentation online because that's how you and all of the experts can contribute to our research, and I think that's type of information is needed to produce proper data. And just to tell you that that's interesting fact was that the expert opinion, the averages that we calculate, they were very, very close to the equal weighting that comes out of the number of measures. So actually it's quite close, but still I think that that is a better exercise to be sure how to produce the weights. Okay, we were not able to update our 86 countries for all the measures because we have received the new information on the negotiations quite late, and that's why I can only show you the information based on the last list of measures. But at the moment, we have 86 countries, and we are going to update it to, well, hopefully as many WTO members as possible. For the small countries, it's quite hard to find publicly available information to code all of the over 100 measures, and if we for lots of measures, if we don't find information, then we drop those countries, right? Because then the index score is not reliable and you cannot use it in your research further on. So at the moment, it's 86. And here you can see in detail the scores for the current practice. So in gray, you see the current practice for the 86 countries. And you can definitely directly see here that on the left side, we have the low-income developing countries such as Benin, Liberia, Chad, Togo, and so on, with very, very low level of implementation of investment facilitation measures right now. And on the right-hand side, the developed countries, USA, Australia, Korea, Germany, that have already implemented lots of measures, and the space to the maximum of 2 is quite limited, right? And the red bars that are added to the gray ones, they shows the improvement of the index score if some kind of investment facilitation framework would be applied to those countries. For example, here we have the middle range investment facilitation framework in dark red. It's based actually on the old Brazil's proposal, which was very, very, very detailed and included so many measures. And you see that there is quite a big improvement, especially for low-income countries. And the second one is, we call it a comprehensive investment facilitation framework, because there we took into account all of the proposal that we had at that time being, and you see here is still even better improvement, but still for developed countries, it's quite low, given the high current level of implementation. Okay, here's just the first picture. So you have like statistics on the distribution of the index score by income level and region. And well, the picture is not surprising, right? Because for low income countries and lower middle income countries, we have the smallest averages. For upper middle and high income countries, the averages are way higher. And even though there is still improvement possible. And the most problematic regions in that case are Africa and to some extent Latin American countries. So that's where we see where the implementation gap really exists and where strong improvements are possible. Just that you're not kind of surprised, the North America is based only on 2 values, right? USA and Canada, that's why they have very, very high average and very high levels of the index score. Okay.
2 minutes reminder.
Thank you. Here is, I think, also very interesting picture. That's the distribution of implementation gap by policy area. So you can see here, for example, for transparency and predictability, for electronic governance, cooperation, application process, that we have few countries with lots of unimplemented measures, right? And for lots of countries, we have very low unimplemented number of unimplemented measures, saying that in these policy areas, we have quite good rate of implemented measures, and the situation, well, is quite good. It's probably some problems in some low and lower middle income countries. For outward investment and for focal point and review policy areas, we have different pictures. So for many countries on the right-hand side, we have very, very high shares of unimplemented measures. And as long as it's not really a big problem for outward investment, it is not really included, probably will not end up in the final agreement, but it's a problem for focal point and review, because that is a very, very important policy area. And there are lots of improvement possible for very high number of countries, right? So that gave us the first side, and we have also had a look on which measures are the most implemented or not. I have also a couple of slides, but we don't have time, so if you're interested, I can show it later on. And the last, just the first, you have an impression, what is the relationship between our index score and FDI flows, and actually stock also, it's the circle size, and we have also illustrated here the income level of countries by the color. Well, we can definitely see that there is a positive relationship, positive correlation between those two, which is not surprising, and that the high income countries have higher flows and stock and are in the upper higher quarter, and in the left bottom quarter, we have the major part of low income and lower middle income countries. They are yellow and orange, saying that those countries that are actually in need of investment, they have also low investment facilitation index scores and need improvements to be able to promote FDI. Okay. Now, just let me conclude. So our purpose is to provide a consistent database with a full coverage of all possible investment facilitation measures that are also go in line with what is negotiated at the WTO, and preferably for all WTO members, but that is still yeah, we'll see how we can cope with that. Ali can probably tell about more how hard it is for some small countries to find the data. But nevertheless, we will try to preview the database so it can serve as a basis for further research in the field, including analysis of the economic impacts of a potential multilateral investment facilitation framework, estimation of barriers to investment facilitation that's going in line with trade facilitation, and Eddie will probably talk more about it today. Measurement of costs associated with the implementation of investment facilitation measures, and also identification of reform gaps for negotiating countries. It is much more important for developing countries, since we need to have some support, financial support, and capacity building initiatives in developing countries to enable them to sign and implement this agreement, really. And last but not least, the whole data set will be also available tool for investors to navigate the investment regime of a large number of countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zoriana, for this excellent presentation. The updated investment facilitation index sounds really exciting to be used. I also encourage everybody to go into the survey to complete the survey. And just want to ask you about what you're going to do with the survey. How are you going to use the results of the survey? If I missed that in the presentation, could you clarify that again?
Yeah, first of all, the aim was to try to distinguish that from the rest of things that are kind of coupled to investment, to FDI, right? Because that was, as an economist, and I was always interested in the effects, right? But I need to start from something, and I had no idea what is actually belongs to investment facilitation, what doesn't. That was the first step to kind of draw a concept and try to quantify it. And by translating this qualitative information into quantitative information, we can now draw scenarios. That's what I showed you in this two different frameworks in the chart, and that's what we actually use for our. Let me go back. Yeah, here. That's what we use as scenarios for our simulations in the CGE model. We still had to make lots of assumptions because not that many data, as we know, is available for FDI, and especially on investment facilitation and costs and barriers and so on and so forth. But still, having this, at least you know what kind of shock you can expect for different countries, and you have the distribution across the countries, so you can estimate the first effects of such an agreement. And now having like this new updated measures, we can even closer try to estimate what is in the agreement, what is negotiated, what might be the effect, and what might be the effect of even much broader agreement if countries would try to include further measures that are not on the table right now. So that is the main purpose to provide the first data set for further research together with other data sets presented today.
Thank you, Zoriana. This is very important work, and I, again, encourage everybody to go into the survey. You should probably share it with the GTAP network so that everybody is aware of it and contribute to this data set, which everybody will be able to use later on. I'm opening the floor for any questions or comments. You can unmute. Eddie, do you have a point you wanted to make? This is about FDI. Okay, let me read it. We haven't compared the FDI and FS databases yet, but that's a good suggestion. Calculating ratios per region and sector. This is in response to the previous point. And Maria has a question. Excellent presentation, Zoriana. Could you share the survey link in the chat, please? Is this index publicly available?
I am just sharing it right now, so I don't forget it. And the information, well, the whole score is available. The country score is already available. I have the link somewhere in the presentation under the map. It's a post that we did it. We updated it long ago because everybody's interested, but it's still work in progress, so we are trying to also provide and update it as much information as we can. And we're still now working to include other countries with different number of measures. So as fast as possible, we'll also provide this information on the web, probably on the WTO website, together with the rest of data sets that will be available for the FDI stock and foreign affiliate sales, I think.
Thank you. David, I just missed your comment and question. Please, the floor is yours.
So thanks for a great presentation, Zoriana. Nice to see you again. So I was wondering about the data source. You may have mentioned this. I mean, I'm thinking of an analogous index as the Doing Business Index, where they have experts in all these, over 150 countries doing this work for them. What is the source of your data for the?
So the sources are different national legal documents, websites, and so on and so forth. It's very different for every measure because the measures are very, very specific, right? And Ali can probably tell you a very fun story about it. How is he's looking for specific points, for specific answers, and it's very really time-consuming work to code every measure for every single country. And we are doing it by ourselves with Ali, actually, who is also a lawyer and can read all of this legal documents much better than me. So Ali, if you want to add something, go ahead and do that.
Sure. Hi, David. So when it comes to other indices like the one you mentioned, or OECD, STRI, like they often have access to like law firms in other countries and a group of lawyers who could go through legal documentation details. But the project as it stands does not have that sort of extensive financing and budget at the moment. So what I do is I go through rules and regulations related to investment facilitation in different countries, and I try to find the answers for those there. And the index is transparent to every measure has a link to the source of data as well, which that source of data is usually the government publication of the related rules and regulation.
So I just want to make a comment. I mean, I think this is fantastic work, and we have to start somewhere. And as you say, it's really amazing that you're able to do this with such limited resources. But we do need to take into consideration that there is often a very substantial difference between the legal framework and the applied framework. And that's often a criticism of the Doing Business study as well, because I remember in a project I had in Malaysia when we were starting, and we were talking about some FDI barriers, and they thought we were going to use doing business type measures, and these people were really angry at us because we thought they thought the Doing Business survey was too much focused on the legal aspects rather than the applied. So that there are differences that we can get, but again, this is amazing work, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, David. I can only add just that's the limitation. That's true, and we are aware of that, and we will say that, and also in the paper. What we are trying to do to kind of show and illustrate and maybe avoid this, at least for some countries, we're trying to do some needs assessments for specific developing countries now. That's the next project that we are going to start probably in this, well, in September, October. And some robustness checks given like opinions of some country-based experts. That's still work in progress, and that's what we are trying to identify. How far are we just using the publicly available legal information, and what is the measurement error, let's say, right? Thank you.
Thank you all for your questions and comments. If nobody else has a question, then I think we can move on to there's just one final question from Maria. Can I make a question more related to data issues from the two previous presentations? Have you used the FI markets data or other data from Bureau and mergers and acquisition database? If you want to quickly respond to that, Zoriana, you can very quickly, and then we will move on to Eddie. Eddie, why don't you share your slides while Zoriana is responding?
I think it refers to the FDI and affiliate stock databases, no?
Yeah, I think so, yes. I was wondering if I may, about your opinion on these two other databases, the FDI markets database from the Financial Times, and another one I cannot remember the name exactly. I know it's from Bureau Bandit, and it's related to mergers and acquisitions, and they also have data on multinationals. Just to know your opinion about those sources of information. Thank you.
Well, maybe I could say something about. Good afternoon. I think these databases would be different types of sources, like private sources, and maybe also more firm level data. Whereas so far we've been relying on national official data sources. So we haven't looked into those data, also because it's rather time intensive. Have you looked into using those data, Maria?
I have, because I'm working on Mercosur, and for these countries, I couldn't find any data. I used FISMOS to split between domestic and multinationals, but at the sectoral level, to go further into regional origin, from which countries, FISMOS is not providing that detail. And then I could not think of any other possibilities. And with the, I used the FDI markets database, and you can aggregate all the firms. I'm not sure how well it covers all the firms available, but at least you have an indication of a stronger presence if you compare across countries. At least you can do something about it. I don't know.
Maria, thank you. Maybe we can leave it for the discussion part, and we can leave the floor to Eddie for his presentation. Thank you.
I'm trying to go in full screen mode, but wait. Okay, so our work, the work that I present is joint work with Roger, who has been presenting before, and actually earlier on we've been working on this as well, and so this builds on I think on all three previous presentations, because what we're going to do is we're going to combine the affiliate sales data on the one hand with the investment facilitation indicator on the other hand, to try to come up with ad valorem equivalents of changes in investment facilitation. Let's see. Now it works. So this is the overview of the presentation. So I'll start with the methodology, say something about the data, present the results, then go into calculation of ad valorem equivalents. We'll also say something about what that means, because already to point that out, these are going to be ad valorem equivalents of what we call the costs of doing being a foreign affiliate. But I'll come to that detail. Then we get to the conclusions. So as an introduction, I think this has been discussed mostly. The trade facilitation agreement, you could say, is a companion. And now when it comes to facilitation, attention has turned to investment. So there was a breakthrough 2016 at the G20 summit. And then now actually negotiations, or there are talks under the JSI, joint statement initiatives, in the framework of the WTO, where 70 members and currently 170 members started negotiating, and currently there seem to be about 100 countries talking about investment facilitation. And so what we try to do is we try to estimate the cost to being a foreign affiliate or being a multinational using a gravity model. And then we express the barriers of being a multinational in the form of ad valorem equivalents. And what we aim to do is to have a first idea of what the potential effects could be of investment facilitation, but obviously also the ad valorem equivalents could be used as inputs into a CG FDI type of model. And linkages here are with previous, but especially also with upcoming presentation where Erwin is going to say something about our work on this. So then the methodology, I start by putting up the equation that we're estimating so that you basically have an idea what we're aiming at. So we're estimating as usual with Poisson, so therefore the exponential, but basically what we do is we regress foreign affiliate sales bilateral and by sector, so from I to J in sector K on a bunch of variables. And so you see we have home country fixed effects and host country fixed effects here. And then we have bilateral variables like colony, religion, common language, and distance. And going backwards, we also have a border dummy, and we have an interaction of this border dummy with some policy variables like IFI, but also FDI restrictiveness. And so why we do that is, or what we do is we include not only foreign affiliate sales, but also sales by domestic firms. And in that way, we can borrow from the gravity literature in trade, where people have started to include both international sales and so domestic sales, intra-national sales. What this buys us is that we're able to both include country level fixed effects and at the same time identify the effect of a country level variable. Yeah, that sounds like a contradiction, because how can you identify a country level variable when you have a country level fixed effect? It's going to eat up everything. Well, what you do is it's going to eat up all the degrees of freedom. What you do is you interact with this border dummy, which tells you whether, in our case, sales are by a foreign affiliate or whether they are domestic. And so what we're really identifying here is we are identifying the impact of, say, IFI on foreign affiliate sales relative to sales by domestic firms. Yeah, that is what this interaction term is buying us. Now, let me go a bit more into detail on that. So it's a background, we do PPML that relates, I think, to a comment in response to Roger's presentation. I think nowadays people almost always do PPML and do not work with like the log and take 1 plus FDI. So this is standard. Investment facilitation index is only available for 1 year. So therefore we use a cross-sectional analysis. And to get rid of variations in the data, we take 3-year averages of all our left-hand side and right-hand side variables. And we run the gravity estimation separately for each of the sectors, although we will also present pooled regressions. Yeah, so then, again, a bit more background on what the thing is with this interaction term of the border dummy and the country-specific variable. So, as I mentioned, it would be absorbed, these country-specific variables would be absorbed by importer and exporter fixed effects. So the solution is then to include also intranational or domestic sales, and here we have some small tables. So basically the border dummy is going to be 1 when you're looking at international sales or for sales by foreign affiliates, so from A to B or A to C, but when it's A to A, we're having domestic sales. And this identification is possible by interacting the border dummy with our policy variables. And so what we're doing is we're measuring the impact of the policy variable on foreign affiliate sales relative to sales by domestic firms. So how do we get to domestic sales? We simply take gross output minus total foreign affiliate sales. Yeah, this is obviously, this is not perfect, but this is we think is a good proxy for the sales by domestically owned firms. Yeah, and we use sectoral gross output based on UNIDO and based on OECD data. Okay, so then we can actually come to the data. So the IFI, I don't have to say much about this. I think Zoriana told all the details ranging from 0 to 2. We work with the version 1 for 68 countries, and there we see that low-income countries start or have a lower initial level, which is going to be relevant for later when we are going to calculate ad valorem equivalence of a scenario of a change in the IFI. Okay, then the dependent variable, this is pretty relevant. Here again, we build on what Steen has been telling us. We use the Eurostat FEAS database, also the national sources. So basically what we do is we build on the data that Steen and Indra and the others in the team have collected. Then we use only the reported data. So we don't use the extrapolated data because then you're going to estimate based on estimated data. But we do work with mirrored values to maximize the coverage. So then I think Steen also mentioned this. The advantage with FEAS data is that we have this nationality of firms assigned to an ultimate investor, and also that we work with 50% voting rights. That is the cap. I can already tell up front, you might ask, why haven't you done this thing with FDI? Yeah, try to interact. The thing is, then it's going to become, I think, very imprecise, because then you would have to look at total investment and what part of total investment is actually done by foreign affiliates. So what part is like FDI? Then, so with foreign affiliate sales, this approach seems to be more more solid. Okay, so then, well, this is relatively standard, although maybe one thing here, we do include a relatively large number of control policy variables like FDI restrictiveness, World Bank doing business, regulatory governance index, so as to try to prevent as much as possible that this IFI is actually capturing variation in other types of policy environment. And so that we really capture more like the residual variation after controlling for other variation in the policy environment. And then the bilateral variables are relatively standard. Okay, so then let's look at the estimation results, and we're actually pretty satisfied with them, because we get, well, the first articulator with red is the pooled regression over all sectors. We see that we get coefficients that are intuitive for almost all variables. Doing business here is not significant, but like governance worldwide, governance index is significant. And what is important is that our investment facilitation index interacted with the border dummy is actually significant and is positive. And well, distance, for example, is negative. Then if we look at the sectors, agriculture, things are insignificant, and actually also the estimation doesn't run very well, probably due to poor quality of data. Mining, things are running, but we do not have a significant effect on investment facilitation. Then for manufacturing, wholesale, transportation, finance, and professional, we do find solid results. For information and telecommunication, results are not significant when it comes to investment facilitation. If you would ask us why, can you interpret why that is the case, then it's going to be relatively complicated to pinpoint why telecommunications, for example, is not significant. Then actually, we started this methodology a while ago, but we've seen that Benz and Jacques have actually done something similar also for mode 3, you could say. Like we're not restricting ourselves to services sector, so therefore I don't call it mode 3, but Benz and Jacques, they have also a paper where they use this approach of interacting policy variables, importer policy variables, with a border dummy, and they also do that for foreign affiliate sales. And so they include, obviously, their interest is more the STRI, and in our case, maybe somewhat surprisingly, or maybe not, we find that the STRI, if we control for all these other variables, is not significant. Then another issue that we did is we tried to remove the policy indices, And we see that then in some sectors, things become significant, like mining and telecommunication. So you get a trade-off between multicollinearity and unlimited variable bias. Yeah, you could say, okay, let's get rid of them, but I would rather say, no, it's better to be stricter and do a harsher test and include like this set of control variables. So then we come to the calculation of the ad valorem equivalence, and that might ask some explanation. So the formula that we use is relatively standard. So basically I would say 4 components. This is like the standard expression that you would derive, say, from an Armington structure. And then the 3 components in there is the coefficient on investment facilitation. It is the change in the policy variables going from old to new. And then it is actually the 1 minus sigma, with sigma the substitution elasticity. Yeah, and does that make sense then with foreign affiliate sales? Well, we think it does, because you can think of this as like, well, I think most of you know, like these structures with a CGE model where you have this nested Armington. First, you choose between goods that are imported from different regions, and then actually you have another nest where you choose goods based on the ultimate ownership. And basically that is the nest that we're looking at, because we look at foreign affiliate sales, and in particular when we map it back to the gravity, sales by foreign affiliates relative to sales by domestic firms. And the premise then is that foreign affiliates, they have to overcome more hurdles. And here, because we stick to Armington, we express them as per unit cost. Of course, in reality, they have more of a fixed cost nature, but then model-wise, it becomes more complicated. Yes, so that is basically, if you start with this structure, you get to this ad valorem equivalent as in the standard way of doing things. Then where are things coming from? This coefficient is basically what we've just estimated here, this beta coefficient. Then the change in the IFI score is based on earlier work by Zoriana and colleagues, but hopefully we can update that with newer proposals, although we always have to be careful with doing that. We work at the WTO, and that also brings me to the disclaimer that I haven't mentioned. And so the substitution elasticity, then I come back to this one. Well, you could say there is a lack of literature, but in principle, I think there is a solution. In the end, the substitution elasticity you use should align with the theoretical model that you're using. And if we take, for example, the GTAP FDI module, it seems to be that there the elasticity of substitution between goods from affiliates from different origin is double the substitution elasticity between goods from different exporting countries. Yeah, and so that is what we align to now. But then if we're going to change the model, then the ad valorem equivalence might also change. So that basically meant we use the elasticities from the GTAP database and we multiply them by 2. And so obviously then that means that the changes in the ad valorem equivalence will be relatively higher in the services sectors because you have low substitution elasticities. Yeah, but in the end, when you bring it to the model, it doesn't matter too much, because then because you have lower elasticities in services sectors, then the trade effects that you're going to generate, or not in this case, the affiliate sales effects that you're going to generate are going to be smaller. Okay, let me go back to this one. So here we can see the change in the IFI score based on the scenario that we have taken from Zoriana's and Axel's paper. And then you see that for lower income countries, we would get the most significant change. And so here we then have the ad valorem equivalents, which ad valorem equivalent cost reductions, which I think are relatively substantial. So ranging between, say, below 10% up to more than 30%. Yeah, and so agriculture, mining, and communication are excluded because they're not statistically significant. Yeah, so this is all very straightforward. So then I'm already at the conclusion, because there is no modeling part or no modeling part yet. Erwin is going to tell about the progress we haven't made. I should already raise a flag. We haven't made complete progress on that, but we will see. Yes, so we see that actually it seems to be that the investment environment as proxied by IFI seems to matter for foreign affiliate sales relative to sales by domestically owned firms. lower income countries, they have a lower IFI score, so they could increase their investment environment most. And then I pointed that out when in services sectors, these cost reductions tend to be most significant. And then an outlook of where we want to go. Hopefully, we can borrow from the ongoing literature by Zoriana and the team to extend the coverage to more regions. Then we can also come up with more up-to-date liberalization scenarios. And then this is something that Roger has already done. We have extended the sectoral coverage by doing that for different manufacturing sectors and doing also some more services sectors. And I think in most sectors, results are carrying. And then finally, we would like to input that into an FDI model. But obviously, we will once the paper is ready, we will also share our results so others could also use this. Thanks. That was all.
Thank you, Eddie, for this wonderful presentation. You put multinational activity and investment facilitation index in a great perspective too. It has the whole organized session has a very nice transition actually. And I'm opening the floor for questions. Does anybody have any questions? While people kind of come up with questions, I have a quick clarifying question for you. The regulatory governance index you mentioned, I think I might have missed it. Is it based on the host country only, or there is any bilateral part to it? Should we think of this as upfront investment costs only, or there is anything related to the source region as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So these policy variables, they're all host country specific, and the thing is that on the home country side, we already kind of control for variations in the regulatory environment by including home country fixed effects. Yeah, so I think. And the other thing is also that when it comes to investment facilitation, it is mostly measured on the host country side. So therefore, we decided to include the interaction term on the host country side. I see that Zoriana wants to say something about that.
Yeah, I just want to add that's one of the also thing that we thought about it, and especially for the cases where you have some bilateral agreements and some measures are incorporating in those agreements, but it doesn't apply to all of the countries, right? That the country is having FDI from. That's why we decided not to incorporate it, but you have it already taken out by the fixed effects, and you also have FDAs, right, included. So that's mainly what you have to take out, and that's covered actually, and that is out of the ad valorem equivalent at the end. Thanks.
Thank you. I see that Maria has a question. Thank you, Eddie. Very nice and useful presentation. Congratulations. So the maximum ad valorems you got were around 30% for least developed countries. Is that right? And from previous literature from Tar and colleagues, I would say that for some services sectors have greater ad valorems for FDI. And do you have any comment on that, Eddie?
So honestly, I think not. We haven't looked into detail at these other estimations, so we will still have to compare to see what are and more equivalents for mode 3 services sales or exactly, yeah. So we will definitely have a look into that and try to there.
I guess the methodology also very, very different from what you're doing with the gravity. And David was here, so maybe David could jump in. He saw your presentation and answer that question.
Well, certainly it's a very different methodology. Yeah, I mean, it's very country specific with detailed, and it's focused primarily on FDI. That's what those interviews do. I mean, the methodology is we go to, we have people who go to stakeholders, to ministries, and to experts in the field, and get a sense of the fill out a questionnaire essentially as similar to what Zoriana has, except with respect to FDI, and then based on and then so we develop an index then of the barriers to FDI, and then there's the regressions, worldwide regressions that suggest how much do these barriers affect the price of the service, and so that's how we end up getting an ad valorem equivalent. So that work is detailed. Starts with sort of detailed country by country work. At least when we do it ourselves. We also, I think the paper, Maria may also be referring to the paper I did with Jafari, which was based on the World Bank data, which is not as more legal than the actual applied work. When we do it ourselves in a particular country, we tried to get an estimate of the barriers which actually exist, not the legal framework. And we find some really dramatic differences there in some cases. So yeah, it's a very different methodology, but I think in some of these FDI cases, we do see some very high barriers to FDI in services.
Thank you, David. Are there any other questions? Maria's commenting on the FDI and trade aspect. She's saying, I think it's also very relevant to go beyond services as you're doing now. And any other questions or comments? If not, I'd like to congratulate you all and your wonderful work in this wonderful organized session. Thanks, Zoriana, for organizing, and thanks to all presenters. It's excellent work, and I think everybody is very excited to look into these data sets and use them. So thanks for all your contributions. And again, I would like to remind you about the survey. You can, I'm really supporting this. So if no other comments, I think to keep to the schedule, we can wrap up the session.